Welcome to the first episode of I have no freaking clue what I'm doing. So to explain what this series is about, we are going to build a real server. To be honest, I have never built a actual server. I have built a few PCs that offer a service, a web server service or DNS I did a few times, but never have I actually taken like a real server case, real server motherboard and started to fit everything into what would end up as being a real server. So I have no freaking clue what I'm doing, but I need to do it. The truth is, our server here in the office is a complete freaking mess. We have a very old Dell R510, a Poweredge, and it has gone through so much. I bought it off eBay years ago and it somehow worked, and at some point we thought it was way too loud to be used inside the office, so we swapped the original fans for a bunch of Nokia NFA6s, which worked flawlessly. It was very quiet from that point on, which was great, but at some point it started to overheat. So I did even worse stuff to it by taking those Nokia fans out and replacing them with very small 40mm Arctic fans that were spinning at like crazy speeds, which did diminish the temperature problem, but I had to break off half of that case to fit these fans. And after I was done with that, a year later now, the server started to randomly shut off and we never found out what the issue is, and it started to die. It didn't want to boot anymore, and every time a server like a Dell R510 boot, that takes like 10 minutes, and it shut off like 5, 6, 7, 8 times a day, and it was just unbearable. And now I was gone for 2 weeks, and apparently the server just didn't want to start anymore. And I came back, I pressed that damn button, nothing. Server was dead. And I started to panic, and at that point I found out if I rip out the bottom power supply, the top one will be lifted off, or lifted like against the top of the case slightly, and then boom, power button works again. So I declared that thing as dead. I need a new server, and this series is about us building an actual server from scratch. So for this series, what this is going to be about is the learning process and the mistakes that we or I will definitely make in the process of building a server from scratch. Because as I said, I have never done that, and entering that domain, the standards that exist, the names, the knowing what fits into what, it's more complicated than I thought, and I needed to do a lot of research to find parts that actually fit into each other so that we end up with something that is actually usable. But we have so many, so interesting parts. Like for example, we got SilverStone who sent over a case, the RM43-320-RS, a behemoth of a case. We got the Asus KRPA-U16M. Yes, a motherboard. And then we got from AMD an EPIC 7763. That's a 64 cores, 128 threads CPU that rocks just a 280 watts TDP by default. So good luck cooling that. I'm not sure if I will manage that. But then we also got 8 sticks of 64 gigs Samsung memory, DDR3, ECC, 3200, which is up to spec to that random named KRPA-U16M. Apparently they are compatible. Then we got a very special Asus SPIF network card, because apparently copper is not the way I want to go. And then to finish it off, we got 20 Seagate Exos X20, 20 terabytes of spinning fidget spinners. That's a lot of storage. That's a hell of a lot of storage. And in every episode we'll talk about each individual piece, why I chose it, why I think it's a good idea to choose it, and if something happens along the lines, we will discover the issue and try to fix the issue, and we will learn from that. So the whole thing here is just a learning experience. And I'm pretty much sure that I made some mistakes, something will not be compatible with something else, and it's going to be a mess. But it's going to be my mess, and it's going to be hell of interesting. But for today, it's not going to be just an intro video. Introduction done, you know what is up, and for today, the main focus will be that SilverStone RM43-320-RS. Oh god. Apparently this is a case, but before we start opening it, Already a huge thank you to SilverStone for providing this behemoth of a case. Oh, this is so freaking big. And it has been sitting in the office for like the last 3-4 months before I could start with this series, but finally. This is an experience on its own. Oh great, more carton. A box inside a box inside a box. That's great. Oh yeah, a lot of aluminum. Or steel, because I have no clue at this point. Slowly, not breaking anything. Oh yeah. So this is the SilverStone RM43-320. This is a 4U 20 bay case, and for servers you have these U measurements, which are like a predefined amount of centimeters. This is a height measuring unit, and then for every server, like let's say blade, you can stack it up 1U, you have 2U, 3U, and then 4U, and you even have bigger if you really want, but this is a 4U unit, so if you have like a rack, this would take up 4 units of space. And naturally, the bigger you go, the more you can fit in them. And in this case, we got 20 bays, 20 freaking individual bays for my hard drives. Now, as you might have already guessed from what I'm telling you, this is going to be a file server mainly. The point is, I have so much power with that AMD EPYC CPU that I could do a whole bunch of stuff, which I may or may not do, but mainly this was meant to be a file hosting server that does nothing else than provide us with the files of these videos for a very, very long time, hopefully. I'm slightly tired now. And now I need to figure out how to open it. Usually you open those like from the top. Oh, maybe it's the wrong way. Yes, it is. The video begins and I'm too stupid to figure out how to open a case. It's great. Learning experience, right there. There are 2 knobs that you can press in, and there are arrows pointing to like the back of the case. And I figure you need to push the top like towards me, but how the hell am I supposed to do this alone? This is the first time I need to open up a manual to figure out how to open a case. Press and hold the top cover's 2 buttons while pushing the cover towards the rear of the chassis to remove it. Yeah, as I thought, but how the hell am I going to press them in? The buttons go along, they are attached to the case, but there are screws. They are secured. Of course this doesn't open. There are security screws which are not explained in the manual. There you got an issue. Here is one screw, and here is another one. Please correct that in the manual, SilverStone, please. Oh yeah. Look at that. Oh yeah. And my lights are reflecting off the case. Sorry if I blinded anybody here. Oh, so let's go over the case, its features, and why I chose it. So the main reason, let's start off with the most important part, is I need storage space. Right now I have, I think, like 20 terabytes or something along that line. 20 terabytes of total storage, secured with RAIDs or with ZFS, the TrueNAS thing. So I got plenty of storage, but these videos produce a lot. Like a good case review does like 100 gigs of just raw footage. 4K, 10 bits, it's incredible how much space these files take up on the server after the video is done. And we keep everything. So we need a lot of storage. Which is why I went with a 4U server that has 20 freaking bays. And these bays are pretty simple. Every server functions roughly in the same way. You got these trays here where you mount a very regular hard drive to them, and then you basically slide them in, maybe do it the right way, and from there you basically just slide them in and close them up and you are done. From there to the back we got this whole back plane here, and how that functions is actually really freaking cool because it combines all of the hard drives into a few single lines that you can later on connect to your motherboard. And in this case we got here these mini SAS connectors, and that was my first entry into like the server world, because on a regular PC you might even have like an expansion card that has a dozen of SATA connectors, but you're always in SATA world. For servers, however, they are very often talking about SAS or SAS, and already on the Dell server it confused the hell out of me, because you have these trays, and these trays or the trays for the hard drives are compatible with SAS drives, but I have never seen a SAS drive. And after a bit of research I basically found out that SAS is nothing else than the combined SATA power and SATA connection connector in a single connector. And the truth is, for servers like my Dell R510, there is no difference if you use a SAS connector or if you use both, like one next to the other. Which means that I was able to use the regular tray that says SAS only, mount a very regular hard drive, and on the backplane side, the connectors were aligned perfectly. It's intercompatible. It's the same damn thing. It's just one connector, and it just confuses everybody, or the hell out of everybody. So although this says SAS, it's regular SATA hard drives, the combined connector is just called SAS. And in this case, you got 4 rows, is it 4? 5? I got 5. You got 5 rows of SAS drives, and all of them, or all 5 in a single row, go into one backplane, let's say daughter board. And these daughter boards, that's really freaking cool, because in the bottom here, the black connector, that's a, I don't want to say it wrong, Mini SAS HD SFF 8643. That's a very special connector, and that was the first really big confusion about this case, because you need to work with that connector. And that connector, what it actually essentially does is combine all the hard drives over a single connector, which you will then go into the motherboard. Whole other topic on the motherboard side, we'll talk about that in detail when we unravel the motherboard, but now just for this one. These Mini SAS HD, what was in this case 8643, they are so freaking confusing, but as for my understanding, and I'm not 100% correct on this, but as far as I got, one of these connectors is basically the same thing as if you would take 4 individual SATA connectors, which is also the reason why you can find a army of 4 SATA to 1 SFF HD Mini SAS 8643 adapters. And it's basically the same thing. And for the same reason, what you can also find is a whole bunch of adapters that adapt M.2 SSD slots into one of these. And as far as my understanding goes, you can use it on a 4x PCIe line. So A, you need to know how many lanes you have available on your motherboard, because you got a whole bunch of these rows here, in total of 5, so 5 of these connectors, and you need to connect them to something. And that has a huge implication on what motherboard you can choose, because although this is compatible with basically freaking everything, and I could slap everything in there, however, if I would take, let's say, a very regular motherboard, a consumer grade with some random Intel chip that has 20 PCIe lanes, and I then occupy 4, 8, 12, 16, yeah, 20, all 20 just by using all of these backplanes. So you really need to keep that in mind, and it was a huge confusion when I bought the server. I read that name for the first time, but it's not that complicated. The Mini SAS HD connectors, it's basically one connector combining a whole bunch of SATA connectors. You can adapt them in every direction, that really works, but you need to know what motherboard you will get, and otherwise you will just use all of your PCIe lanes and then you are stuck with the last blade doing nothing. Now these individual backplanes, the individual blades here, do require power, and we have 2 Molex connectors per side, which isn't really my favorite thing in the world. I do hate Molex, I really do, but I need to do it, we need to use it. Another very cool thing about these blades is the army of PWM connectors that we have. A total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 PWM connectors. Why? Because on each and every one of these blades, we got a very small temperature sensor. So if you connect your fans, for example the 3 here, to which we will get in a second, if you connect those to these backplanes, they will control the cycle, basically the PWM signal, and adjust the fans to the need of the backplane, which will get its temperature by using the sensor from the hard drive. So you will always be sure that at least they are running cool, which is really freaking great. However, I do question it slightly why we need 6 per blade, totaling at 6, 12, 24, 30. Why we have 30 individual PWM connectors, I don't really get that. I mean, 3 or let's say 5 or 6 would have been enough, but sure, we got like 30. Why not? And while we are talking about the temperature sensor and the PWM controller on there, let's transition to these fans. These are 120mm sized, 38mm thick fans. They are behemoths. Now find out how to remove one of them. Like that. They are very quickly exchangeable. They are SilverStone made ones, and because of the curve, of the PWM curve of these sensors, I do know that these monsters are spinning at up to 4000 RPM, so do not stick your finger in them. It will get shred off without a doubt. But the really cool thing about it is you can actually exchange them, because if you have a look at this little box here they prepared for like quick installation and removal of them, you have here the connector, which is positioned in a little bracket in a very specific location. And what happens here, you have the mother part of this connector in the bottom here, and once you slide it in, both connectors will align and connect to each other, and there you have the fan. So this is hot swappable as hell. You can remove one while the whole thing is operating, exchange the fan in case it breaks, and then install a new one. So these bad boys are real monsters, and they need to be, because they not only need to, let's say, suck the air of the CPU area to the front of the case, but they need enough power to squeeze them through the hard drives and then get everything out. Plus you need a lot of static pressure, because if you look at the front, everything is basically closed off. You got the slits here, yeah sure, but inside you got a hard drive, you got components that are producing heat, the hard drive itself is getting pretty hot, especially if you stack 5 on top of each other, and that like 5 times, so it's a lot. And they need to be strong enough to push everything out. And this is a server, and in the server world, everything needs to be running forever without interruption, which is why these here are dual ball bearing fans. And I'm not sure if I want to leave them in or exchange them for something that is a bit quieter, but that will be seen once the server is running for the first time, and then I can adjust it to my own needs, because yeah, it's just a file server. I guess they will do a very fine job. I'm just not sure in the end if I want to have the noise level that they are going to inevitably produce for my everyday work, because the server is sitting like 5 meters behind my head. So we will see about that later on, but let's swap this one back in. And now coming to the back here, which is the motherboard area. Like every server, the motherboard is, or not every, but almost every, the motherboard sitting towards the end. And we have all of these pre-cut holes here for, I guess, do whatever the hell you want in here. Officially, we got eATX and SSI EEB support in here. But I guess with the amount of holes, you can do whatever the hell you want. And the motherboard that we got has a hole in the middle. The motherboard that we chose is so freaking weird. You're going to see it. It's going to be really cool. But for the motherboard, it's basically do whatever you want to do. And for the height, because it is a 4U server, we are not restricted anymore to use these like just heat sinks, which are going to dissipate the heat by help of the fans. We are not restrained to those types of coolers. What we can do is put an actual cooler with an actual fan on there. And in here, we are looking at roughly, minus the motherboard, roughly 156 millimeters of real estate for coolers, which is why we're going to combine this one with the Arctic Freezer, it has a name, 4U I think, which is the reason that we are going to combine this with the Arctic Freezer 4U, or the new Arctic Freezer 4U that has been specifically made with a little bit less of plastic in the top so that it fits 4U cases. It's going to be great. So for the Freezer 4U, I think it's enough to cool down the Epic 7763 that we got. However, the truth is, if I'm going to use this solely for file storage, the CPU will basically idle 90%, 95% of its lifetime. So I guess it won't dissipate any real heat to begin with. So I do believe that the whole thing will perform exactly how I expect it to, and that these fans will also run on very low RPM numbers all the time. But that's just my guess at this point. Coming to the PSU here in the top, by default, and that's also a reason why I chose this chassis here. By default, you can mount two types of PSUs in here. Either very regular ATX PSUs, like every PC that exists, which is great, but if you really need redundancy, you can also install two mini PSUs, which do exist in tremendous power levels, and then run the whole system in redundancy. By default, like my old R510 does have two PSUs, which are pushing like 1000 watts. They are really freaking powerful and really freaking long. However, I don't want to do it. I have an army of PSUs which are great, which will do the job just fine, and we also got one from SilverStone which is going to go in here. And the truth is, mini PSUs that are redundant for the system are a great idea if you have like very critical infrastructure. But in our case, we are running it as a file server. What are the chances that the PSU dies? That's the first thing. It's not going to die probably in the next years and years. And B, nothing for us is so critical that I do need two PSUs. I can run off a single one. If it breaks, you saw how quickly I opened the case up once I figured out that there are screws. In everyday usage, I would just run it off with a single power supply. If it one day dies, I will just exchange it. I have more than enough security on like a software level to handle possible corruptions of files or file loss. I will handle that software wise. So I do not need redundant PSUs. We will stick with the single ADX PSU, which hopefully has an army of Molex connectors. But do these backplanes really need two Molex connectors per se? Yeah, of course, you need them to power the hard drives. I always thought it was because of the temperature sensor and the PWM controller, but no, it's for the hard drives. I need to see how many of them I have on the power supply that SilverStone sent along. And if I don't have enough, I need to buy an army of SATA to Molex adapters, which I will do today. I learned something. We need an army of Molex connectors. Then, because this is still a server, and a server like that is not supposed to sit on the table, or in my case, sit in the shelf, but actually you would install it inside a server rack. I probably won't do it anytime soon because A, I don't have a server rack, and B, I don't really need to, but you can, and that's why you have all of these accessories here. You have, for example, these that are usually just referred to as the ears of a server, which are mounted like on the side, I guess like this. And what this allows you to is A, pull on the server, but you are pulling it out of a big ass shelf meant for servers, and the whole thing would be sitting on these rails, which you can already see are expandable. So if you have like a big ass server rack, you have these rails mounted inside, the server is sitting on top of them, mounted down using the ears. And then from there you can unlock the ear, basically with this small little button up here, and the whole thing is being pushed out. So you can pull out the server, work on it, pull it back in. But I will probably not do this because I just don't need to. The server is sitting in its own shelf, it is open from the top, so I'll always have access to it if I need to. Although I hope that I don't need to have access to it in the foreseeable future. But that was one last piece. Whew. And to finish off this case, we got some I/O. We don't have so much I/O. We have two USB ports, one of which seems to be USB 3.0, and then we have a start and what seems to be a reset button. Now, what's also kind of cool, we got two indicators that look like either network or these blades here, back plane, the rows, and we got something that looks just like a database image, which I guess is for hard drives, because everything is running fine. Something that is quite astonishing for me is you don't have a VGA connector in the front, which I saw on so many servers. I thought that was like a standard practice, but apparently no, you need to connect the display from the back, which is interesting. That's okay, but you need to keep that in mind if you want to have the server movable out of the server rack, so that the cable doesn't pull on anything. But okay, that's Something I didn't expect. For other mini features of the case, we still got a little DVD port for your slim optical drives if you really wanted to. And before I forget it, and that's also kind of cool for me, because I don't want to have the operating system running on one of the hard drives. I don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do is install a regular SATA SSD on here, or in here. And you actually got two individual spots meant for that, which are right here and right here. And to install an SSD, you have these plastic clips here which mount to one side of the SSD, and then you basically just clip it in. So you have two additional SSDs that you can then connect using regular SATA and regular SATA power or Molex. I don't think there was ever an SSD running on Molex, but you can connect to there. I will only connect a single one because I just need one for the operating system, so I'm fine there. And then everything is connected. Now, one huge difference between this server and this server chassis and a lot of other ones out there is that there is no RAID controller in here. A lot of servers out there will come with an integrated RAID controller so that you have some sort of connection to the motherboard, which will just, let's say, bundle everything in the front and then send out a single signal. And then software-wise, from a sort of BIOS, you can control how the RAID controller treats the hard drives. And I had the same thing inside my Dell R510, and you could do the usual RAID 0, RAID 1, RAID 5, everything you can imagine. However, as far as I'm informed, TrueNAS, the old FreeNAS, now called TrueNAS, does not like RAID controllers. Apparently, TrueNAS prefers to have direct connections to the drives and handle the whole RAID thing on its own, probably due to them using ZFS, which is a whole other topic. But apparently you can use a RAID controller, because I did it in the beginning for my Dell server, where I had just a RAID 5 running, and then that was sent out to TrueNAS, but TrueNAS did believe that that was just a single drive. But the RAID controller handled the other part. The thing is, I don't really care. I would just do whatever TrueNAS believes is best and then stick to their recommendation. And this server does not have a RAID controller, and all of the connections are going from these individual backplanes into the motherboard, and they are going to be treated as individual drives. And from there I can do whatever RAID I want. So that's something that you need to keep in mind when you are choosing server hardware. And in this case, I do believe I made a great choice. The combination of my motherboard choice and the chassis choice should function just fine. I do need a single adapter for one of the mini SAS connectors, but we will get to that once we unravel the motherboard part. But okay, I believe for today, this is going to be it. This is the SilverStone RM43-320-RS. This is a behemoth of a case, but at this point, a huge thank you to SilverStone for sending this over to us. Because that thing costs a whopping 750 euros right now. And it's hard to get, but it is incredibly expensive. And something that you will learn very quickly once you start playing in the whole server space. Everything is freaking expensive. The most basic thing is triple the cost of a regular PC. It's incredible. But everything is built to last forever. And if I look at this case, this is going to last longer than me with how I treat my body. This will survive me. But again, huge thank you to SilverStone for sending it over. And from now on, next episode we will go over the motherboard and we'll start installing that one, and we'll also cover a bit of the case, or a bit more of the case in the other videos as we put stuff in here. But then for the next time, it's about the Asus, and I can't remember that name, KRPAU16M motherboard, a motherboard that has a hole in the middle, because apparently that makes sense. But for today, we already learned a bit. We learned how to open the case, and we learned that SilverStone should redo the manual and add these two screws, because apparently I was too dumb to figure this one out on my own very quickly. So yeah, for today, this is going to be it. Again, a big thank you to SilverStone for sending it over. And we will talk more about the case or how to use it as the series progresses, because there is a lot more to unravel, unpack and learn, and hopefully nothing that I need to buy later on, but we will see about that. For today, thank you for watching and hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.